Okay, so today I'm going to be teaching you how to analyze poetry and craft a thesis based on that. Okay, so the first step to analyzing any poem is reading it, so let's do that. Jerusalem, and did those feet in ancient time, by William Blake. And did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green, and was the holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures seen? And did the countenance divine shine forth upon our clouded hills, and was Jerusalem builded here, among these dark satanic mills? Bring me my bow of burning gold, bring me my arrows of desire. Bring me my spear, O clouds unfold, bring me my chariot of fire. I will not cease from mental fight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand, till we have built Jerusalem and England's green and pleasant land. Okay, so the first thing that I like to do after reading the poem is finding any literary devices that were used in the poem. Right off the bat, in the third quatrain, you can see there's a lot of anaphora being used with bring me my blank. So like right in here. So I'm going to write down anaphora. The next one that I see right off the bat is in the fourth quatrain, right here. And I assume that this means that his sword will not rest in his hand. It will always be at the ready until they've built Jerusalem in England. So I'm going to write down metaphor, which are used in many poems, almost every poem. The next thing that I notice in this poem is in the first quatrain, right here, and it refers to those, so that must be referring to a character. We also see like a mild use of anaphora right here, from which we can assume that these two are somehow related. And his sword will not sleep in his hand, as we analyzed earlier. Some other parts of this quatrain that stick out to me to better understand what's going on. Some keywords are the Holy Lamb of God and ancient time. And from those we can assume that the poet is referring to something ancient, something holy, which points in all directions to a Jesus or God type figure. This is kind of confirmed in the next quatrain when it says countenance divine. Countenance actually means face. I like to look that up. So it's saying the divine face, asking if the divine face shone upon our clouded hills, and also with the use of anaphora here. That kind of connects it back. So from these first two quatrains, we can assume that William Blake is talking about Jesus and asking if Jesus was ever in England, if he's shown his face upon the clouded hills, or if he ever walked on England's mountains green. The next part that I didn't really understand, that I had to do further research into, was in the second quatrain, when he refers to dark satanic mills. Around the time that this poem was written was the Industrial Revolution that was going on in England, and it just so happens that William Blake despised the Industrial Revolution, so he refers to the mills, or basically factories, as dark and satanic. In the third quatrain, where we saw anaphora, it seems like he's ready to go to war or to battle based on the things that he mentions. He mentions bow, arrow, spear, chariot of fire, and he's asking them to be brought to him, as if he's ready to go to battle against the Industrial Revolution and the dark satanic mills, which he mentions in the previous quatrain. And then sure enough, in the fourth quatrain, next quatrain, he mentions the mental fight that he will not cease from. So he's getting ready to go to war, and he will not cease from it until we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land, which is said right here. So to really bring this all together, in the first two quatrains, he's asking if Jesus ever came to England, and he asks if Jerusalem was ever built among these dark satanic mills, presumably in ancient times, as is said in the first quatrain. Right after he says this, he launches into his battle cries, asking for his weapons to be brought in order to fight, presumably, the Industrial Revolution, so that they could build Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. From this we can kind of infer that William Blake thinks that the Industrial Revolution and the Dark Satanic Mills are what keeping Jerusalem from being built, or like a Jerusalem-like place, because Jerusalem, in many cases, symbolizes peace and happiness more than like the actual place Jerusalem. So he can either be talking about actual physical Jerusalem being built in England, or maybe Jesus coming and him bringing peace and happiness as opposed to building a physical place. So to kind of further sum up the poem, we can go, first thing he talks about is Jesus in England. And then he goes into the Industrial Revolution. In which he says that there could be no Jerusalem, presumably. Then he goes into fighting the Industrial Revolution, and then talks about not stopping fighting until Jerusalem is built in England. So, Jerusalem is built in England. So I transferred over our notes so that we could write a thesis. And basically when writing a thesis, you want to hit 3 major points. The how, like using what literary tools. For this one, we figured out that he uses anaphora and metaphor. So we're going to put that in our thesis. And then there's the insight, which you kind of have to get for yourself. Each person is different in terms of this. You can't really get it from the poem. It's more like what you think of the poem. And then there's also the theme, which is basically what the author is talking about, which we have in here. And for pretty much all theses about poems or poetry, you can start off with in blank. So in this I would say in Jerusalem, the author, so William Blake, expresses his feelings on Jerusalem and the Industrial Revolution and whether Jesus was ever in England. So I'm going to write a thesis, and I'll be back in a second because you're not going to be able to read it if I draw it out like this. Okay, so from the analyzation of this poem, I came up with the thesis. In William Blake's poem, Jerusalem, he uses literary devices such as anaphora and metaphor to assign emphasis and to connect ideas, while expressing his view that the Industrial Revolution was satanic, an opinion which illustrated the polarizing effect that the Industrial Revolution had on many people. So as you can see, I hit all 3 prongs here, with the how being using anaphora and metaphor to assign emphasis and connect ideas. The theme is that the Industrial Revolution was satanic, and the insight, or the so what question, is that it illustrated the polarizing effect the Industrial Revolution had on many people. So that's all I have for analyzing poems. My main tips are to look for the use of literary devices and to look up words you don't understand, because that can be crucial. So thank you, and bye.